Okay. I want to say a couple things before we get started with today's topic. Today is October 21st. This is Jews and the News, and our topic today is the assassination of Sinwar. The, they're calling him the mastermind, but I'd say the evil mastermind of everything that happened on October 7th and afterwards with Hamas. So I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I had my vaccines yesterday for flu and COVID, and as happens all the time when I get these booster shots, I'm feeling under the weather. Not as bad as other times, but if I seem a little bit slow on the uptake, it's because of that. Number two, if you're looking for the recording from last week's session in which I talked about uh, cancel culture, talked about Facebook posts of that we might think could be considered private, but what happens if you're a public person? That video was deleted. And it was from the suggestion of the person who helped coordinate that event that we had in the sukkah yesterday about climate change from our social action committee, who suggested that I gave too many identifying details about the speaker, even though I didn't say the speaker's name that we canceled. And I agreed with that person that I should delete that video. So um, so like I said, I spoke about cancel culture, and it was interesting that I didn't think of that, but what are the what's the bar? How high is the bar that we should set where we say we're not going to talk to somebody anymore because of their unreasonable position? And I thought my bar was set pretty high. Um, I talked also about what the posts were, and I don't want to get into that again because I just don't want to highlight the posts themselves and cause more internet traffic as you're looking for those posts to see what was so terrible about it. And I talked about, people who serve in a public capacity, like myself, even though the congregation is smaller, much smaller than, let's say, Park Avenue Synagogue or Central Synagogue, where those rabbis have quite the following on Facebook and have two Facebook pages, a private one and a public one. And even if you have separate ones, does that really do enough to highlight the difference that you shouldn't, that people shouldn't mix what somebody posts privately and assume that that represents their public position? So I think that even that blurs the line, kind of. Anyway, so that's what the topic, in case you were wondering what the recording was all about. So hopefully you understand why the recording was deleted. And okay, so today, um, so let me introduce the topic this way, related to my manipulating the computer on Shabbat for Zoom, which I've been doing for the past 4.5 years for shul, and what I do on Shabbat regarding checking the news on my phone. So before October 7th, I would not look at October 7th last year. I would not look at my phone on Shabbat. I'm of the opinion, even though I use electricity on Shabbat, using electricity in my mind is a slippery slope. So I use electricity on Shabbat to turn on a light, but I don't use electricity to turn on my oven, and I don't use electricity to turn on the dishwasher. So I don't use electricity where the result of the use of the electricity will turn on a machine to do work. And it could be argued scientifically that I'm turning on a machine, the lights, LED lights or regular lights, that's work too. But I don't view it as work. And the law committee years ago for the conservative movement said turning on a light switch is perfectly fine on Shabbat. And even to modern times, a teshuvah that came out last year said it's okay to drive an all-electric vehicle on Shabbat. So you're not lighting a fire when you're driving a gas-powered vehicle. The gasoline is ignited by the spark plug, so you're lighting a fire when you turn on your car. Aside from the fact that then you're traveling on Shabbat, so that traveling may not be an issue if it's an all-electric vehicle, and all you're doing is like turning on a light. So using your Tesla or some other all-electric vehicle to drive the shul on Shabbat might not be considered a violation, like it might be considered a violation if you drive in a gas-powered vehicle on Shabbat. Okay, so there'd be a whole other discussion about work on Shabbat, work in air quotes, because clearly all of these things aren't manual labor, but they're still considered in this category of work that we're not supposed to do on Shabbat. So what's the work involved in turning on a laptop and checking news or checking other things on Shabbat? So there's the spirit of Shabbat too, right? What happens in our mind, right? And I think scientific studies have been done about this actually, that what happens in our brain when we go on social media or do other things on the internet. There's something happening in our brain that is causing stress and anxiety, especially among teens going on social media. It's good that even though it's late in coming, that TikTok and Instagram, I think, now have settings that parents can set for their teens to make it a little bit less stressful. Still, the stress that happens, and it has been scientifically proven, that happens in our brains when we go on the internet for things like this, could certainly go against the spirit of Shabbat. We're supposed to be de-stressed. We're supposed to be feeling calm and feeling like rejuvenated. And so accessing the internet on Shabbat, really, we shouldn't do that. And you could argue that you shouldn't read the news on Shabbat either. How can you just read good and welfare kind of articles in the news? It's kind of hard to kind of focus just on that. So I make a compromise. I use my Kindle on Shabbat. That's how I read most of my books. I use my Kindle because I don't use the Kindle to access anything else. People could use their Kindle, if you're connected to Wi-Fi, to connect to other internet pages. I don't do that. And so I'm not even tempted to do it on my Kindle. So I just read a book on Kindle. And I don't, in some books that I'm reading, some lines are underlined. That shows how many people have like that line. I don't click on that line. I don't do any clicks or anything like that. I just read. So that's the compromise I make. And since October 7th, I do go on my phone to read the headlines, just in case something happened, like October 7th happened, and I should be aware of it and should know, how to be prepared. Like I had to be prepared last October 7th of how that's going to impact the service that day and how that was going to impact Simchat Torah that night and the next day. So, and Orthodox synagogues were not impacted by that, and they just went on as usual, though I'm sure there are some people in Orthodox synagogues who went on their smartphones and told the Orthodox rabbis what was going on, but rabbis themselves did not know what was going on. So that all leads me, the other compromise I've made in the past 4.5 years in order for us to survive as a synagogue and a community was to allow the use of Zoom for Shabbat and other services. And there was a teshuvah that said we're allowed to use Zoom in a time of crisis or an emergency in order to keep the community together and to do services. The question is, when is the emergency over? So there are a lot of synagogues who don't Zoom anymore at all. and are back to being in person for all services, including Daily Minyan, and only live stream those services, or maybe they Zoom their services still, but they don't count people on Zoom who are on Zoom for that service towards the Minyan. So we're not in that position. People who come regularly on Friday night have told me loud and clear that they are not coming, they're not driving to the building to do the service. And certainly the evening Minyan people are not driving to the synagogue for a 10-minute service when we can do it on Zoom. So I haven't changed our policy because we need to make a minyan and to be able to provide for Kaddish being said for yahrzeit and mourners. So the question, though, on Shabbat morning and holiday mornings, we get nice crowds. So why should I still need to manipulate Zoom and my laptop on Shabbat anymore? There could be one less thing that I don't have to do anymore, so to make my Shabbat and holiday more like Shabbat and a holiday. So that's why the religious committee agreed that we would stop Zooming Shabbat and holiday mornings, and it went well. This past weekend was the first weekend without doing Zoom. And Ira Kohlmeister told me at one point during the weekend that like 13 or 15 people were watching the live stream, and we had a minyan to start the service also in person. So it went very well. Okay. All that being said, that 12-minute introduction, so thanks for your patience with all of that, is why I was able to know on Thursday, the first day of Sukkot, that Sinwar, well, when I read the news on my phone in the morning at home, Times of Israel was saying that we think that Sinwar was killed. They didn't, Times of Israel didn't until after the service was over and we were walking into the sukkah for Kiddush. So that was at like 12:30. It wasn't till then that it was confirmed that he was dead, and other news outlets were reporting that he's dead. So if I had one or two people did come up to me during the service and say Sinwar might be dead. So I had to tell them, yes, I know, because I went on my phone and I know that. I even checked my phone during the service. Those who were there might have seen me walk into the Grossberg Baumgart Chapel at one point during the Torah reading, and I checked my phone then too to see if there was an update to say he was definitely confirmed killed, and it hadn't been yet at that point. So yeah, so you know, if the Phillies were in the World Series and the game was on holiday or Shabbat morning, I would not check my phone. Now, I wouldn't mind if somebody told me what the score was, but I would not check my phone for that because I'm able to discipline myself that I don't check my phone for sports or entertainment. I check the phone for impactful news. Okay, so the killing of Sinwar is impactful, and just coming on the heels of killing Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and then the killing of Hania in Iran, and all of the pager and walkie-talkie project and the killings and injuries that happened with that. Really quite the accomplishment for Israel's army and intelligence services. You know, the story hasn't been completely written yet, but the amount of logistics involved in making those pagers and walkie-talkies and setting up these dummy corporations and then getting Hezbollah to agree to buy those pagers and walkie-talkies from that particular corporation versus some other corporation, and embedding the bomb in those devices and being able to trigger them through a particular text or communication is the stuff of spy novels. You expect to read that in a book or see it on a movie and not expect that to actually be a real life thing. So just the fact that Israel is able to do that, it instills in us a sense of pride. Even though innocent people were killed in those pager attacks, right? It's because the terrorists left the device on their kitchen table and their children had access to it. So, yes, that was the risk that Israel was willing to take, because some of them, like there was one video of one of these pagers going off in an outdoor market. So yes, there's a danger that other people who might have been standing nearby or sitting nearby might have been injured too. But so this gets to just what I said in shul on Thursday in my remarks, and what I've said in other times. The part of the evil of Hamas and Hezbollah, part of the evil. There's a lot evil about them as terrorist organizations and how they function. But part of the evil is that they prompt Israel as a moral, humanitarian country to make horrible choices, right? So when a country goes to war against another country, then they follow particular laws and conventions that have been passed. And then you're mostly assured, except for how Russia has been attacking Ukraine, but that since this isn't Russians and the news, this is Jews and the news. I'm not going to talk about how Russia has violated all the Geneva Conventions and everything like that, and how they attack infrastructure and hospitals and schools in Ukraine, etc. So those are war crimes. And when the war is over, theoretically, Putin and others can be brought up on charges, right? That's how it works when a country, especially if they're part of the United Nations, when two United Nation countries go to war against each other. But it doesn't work that way when Israel, for example, is attacked by a terrorist organization, or attacked by two terrorists, or three, or four, right? The proxies in Iraq have been shooting missiles into Israel. The Houthis in Yemen have been shooting drones and missiles into Israel, and the Iranians. Okay, so Iran is a country in the United Nations, and so they've attacked Israel too. And Israel is waiting now or deciding what to do about Iran. But all of this to say that Israel is faced with horrible moral choices in how to fight back against the terrorist organization, because the terrorist organization is not based on a military base outside of civilian population areas. They're, in fact, the opposite. They're based in civilian population areas on purpose, in schools, in mosques, in United Nations facilities, and United Nations workers have been proven to be members of Hamas and Hamas terrorists as well. So how to fight then against that and the choices that Israel had to make. So the killing of Sinwar then is a major accomplishment. And it's interesting, there were celebrations in Israel once the news spread, and people were gathered on the streets to celebrate that. And I feel uncomfortable about that. And somebody in shul in the sukkah, actually, when hearing the news, didn't do it so loud, but loud enough for me to hear because it was near me, started to sing Siman Tov and Mazel Tov. So I also was uncomfortable about that. So, it's one thing for Israel to do its business, and I will support Israel in the way it conducts its war. Israel's army is the Israel Defense Forces. It's called that on purpose. It's not the Israel offense force, right? It's not designed for attacking and randomly attacking others. It's a defense force, and it has a very clear policy on how soldiers are supposed to engage in battle. That is probably it's not it's more than just equal to the United States Army. It's above in terms of how moral and ethical soldiers are expected to be. So yes, there are soldiers who violate those norms. Absolutely, every army has that, and Israel should investigate those people and bring them to justice. But for the most part, Israel's army is conducting as moral and ethical campaign against Hamas as is reasonably possible. And the tragedy is that so many innocents have been killed and displaced, and that is a tragedy of this war against terrorists as opposed to a war that Israel could be waging against another country. So we just need to keep that in mind. Yes, we're devastated by the death and displacement of so many innocent Palestinians, but it comes with a but. Okay, it shouldn't just be about the death and displacement of Palestinian civilians. They're displaced because Hamas has forced them to be displaced and to be killed. So I don't celebrate. Yes, I do. I am overjoyed that Israel is able to kill Sinwar, but I wouldn't be out on the street celebrating about it. I don't think that if I were living in Israel, had I made Aliyah years ago to such a point that my kids might be in the army right now as we speak, would I be rejoicing that Sinwar is dead, knowing that maybe the war is coming to an end and my children who might be in the army would be now safe? Would I be? Yes, I'd be celebrating that, but would I be celebrating that in the street? I don't think so. It's just my nature, and I think it's Jewish nature not to do that. But that being said, there are plenty of Jews, those who live in the communities that are in the West Bank, for example, and others who have been celebrating in the street about this. But, it's a different kind of celebration than Palestinians celebrate when a terrorist is able to bomb a cafe in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. To celebrate that is quite different than celebrating Israel's achievement of killing the terrorist leader. So, celebration is again a slippery slope, and I would say so. This is number one. The one Jewish reaction to the killing of Sinwar is how much we should celebrate, in my opinion, about the celebration. The other is ventures into like politics and strategy, and that I'm not an expert on by any means. And that's why I want to share my screen in a moment for Bret Stephens and his op-ed that he wrote last Thursday in response to Sinwar's death and killing. So it might be a knee-jerk reaction, or maybe not, but I'm sure he gave time to think about what the implication of Sinwar's death would mean for the hostages. That's what I immediately thought. Would this mean now that the hostages would be released? Or will it mean that all of the hostages will be killed if they haven't been killed already? So we don't know, and I have no idea about stuff like that, but that's certainly the hostage families themselves have been protesting in Israel, saying now is the time to reach a deal with Hamas to end the war and bring the hostages home. So, right, so there's still debate in Israeli society about what needs to be done now, mainly coming from Netanyahu, as clearly, the war is still going on. So let me share. Yes, go ahead, Gabe.
I remember hearing a story, I don't know if it was a midrash or whatever, that after the Egyptians were drowned in the Red Sea,
Right.
the Israelites were celebrating and they were rebuked by angels.
No, it's one step above that. Angels were celebrating, and God
Angels.
rebuked the angels.
Oh,
Okay, so how can you celebrate when my children have died? So, which is pretty progressive and radical for the rabbis at that time. You know, we don't imagine society 2,000 years ago to be concerned or sympathetic to the enemy. And clearly in the Torah, as especially how the rabbis understand the Torah, the Egyptians are, they're not our arch enemy, but they're enemy number two behind Amalek, which is enemy number one. Arch enemy number one is Amalek. Arch enemy number two is the Egyptians, the way they enslaved us, the way they treated us, etc., etc. So even then, God says to the angels, "You can't cry. You shouldn't be celebrating. You should be crying for the death of my children, because the Egyptians are children too." So it gets to also why we take the drops of blood, drops of wine out of the cup during the Seder to represent the 10 plagues. So we're decreasing our joy to reflect the fact that the Egyptians had to suffer and die in order for us to be free. And on the holiday, we add Hallel to the service, these 5 psalms that are added to the service on the holidays. And sometimes we do a partial Hallel where 2 halves of 2 psalms are not recited to reflect the fact that it's not quite a holy day like Rosh Chodesh, the new month. It's a partial holiday, so we do a partial Hallel. And also 6 of the 8 days of Passover, the last 6 days, we do a partial Hallel too, for the same reason that we shouldn't be overly rejoicing, because our freedom came at the hands of came at the death of Egyptians. So it's part of our Midrash DNA and Jewish identity about how to respond to the death of enemies. Right? So yes, so it's thanks for bringing that up, Gabe. And yes, that's another reason why we shouldn't be celebrating. That's not to say that there aren't fundamentalists in the community, like Baruch Goldstein on Purim 20 years ago, whenever it was, went into the cave where Abraham and Sarah, where the matriarchs and patriarchs are buried, which also happens to be a mosque. And he went into that place then and started shooting and killed, I don't know, 20 people, something like that, 20 Muslims as fighting back against Amalek, and who that Baruch Goldstein thought that were Amalek today, those Arabs praying in the mosque. So yeah, so I'm understand that there are fundamentalists in the community, but the extremists don't represent the norm in the Jewish community. So that's point number one that I wanted to talk about, the death of Sinwar. So now let's look at Brett Stevens' article. And so, yeah, go ahead.
First, when we're talking about the immediate result of the death of Sinwar, I think about Abbas praising him after his death was announced. And I'm thinking, that's not what is reaching the President Biden, all the other Western groups that are saying, give them the rule of Gaza. That's insane. The people who were praising Sinwar should rule Hamas.
Okay, so we're touching on an area, Bess. Yes. So yeah, so to highlight how Abbas and some in the Arab world celebrated his death, or at least were publicly saying that they mourn the death of Sinwar, a leader of the Palestinian people, so, or a martyr for the Palestinian cause, right? That's what Abbas said. So look, we're getting into an area about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what we think about if there should be a future for a two-state solution or anything like that. So I'm not an expert on that by any means, but I will say that I know some people have to say things publicly in order to maintain a particular standing in their society. So I don't want to be seen as like apologizing for Abbas. I don't know. Please don't understand that I'm apologizing for Abbas. But I am saying that if we want if we in the West, we liberal-minded Jews or even center moderate Jews who believe someday that there'll be peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, you have to weigh kind of the public statement and the nature of the statement to understand that if he's the person we need to work with, well, he needs to be the person that has support from his people. So if he were to publicly say we condemn Sinwar and all he stood for and celebrate his death, I don't think that most Palestinians would agree with that. I don't know, but again, so the interesting thing is what some Arab leaders of Arab countries did not say. In other words, they decided not to make a public statement at all. Okay, so the king of Jordan didn't say anything. The president of Egypt didn't say anything. So, okay, saying nothing, there's a statement from the Talmud, maybe it's from the Mishnah, shtika kahoda'ah dame. Silence is like agreement. So, king of Jordan, the president of Egypt, silent, no public statement. Maybe they agree with Israel for having done this, but they're not willing to risk anything by saying anything publicly about it. Certainly not to be publicly in support of Israel, but certainly they also didn't publicly say that he's a martyr. So the fact that they were silent also says a lot too. So let's take a look at Bret Stephens, and like I do, I cut and paste the article onto a Google Doc so we're not distracted by ads or anything like that. So that's why it looks like this. And this is what the article was called. So if you have a subscription to New York Times, you can look this up yourself and read the whole article if you want. So we'll see how much of the article we get to. So again, I like Bret Stephens. And like I said, over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I read the people I like because I don't have the headspace for reading people I don't like, and I don't have the headspace to be aggravated. I'm aggravated enough by understanding the news and how people are reporting the news. I don't need to read people and their opinions that I don't agree with. That far I'm not going to go, and certainly I don't watch the talk shows, the news talk shows on CNN or MSNBC or Fox. I don't watch those talk shows. Those to me are a waste of time, and in fact, more than just a waste of time, they are bad for my mental health. So I will not bother with them at all. I understand why people do watch them, but I never read letters to the editor in any of the newspapers. Again, it's the same idea. I don't need to be bothered by this. Like I said, I'm bothered enough by the news. I don't need to read people's opinions that are, okay, enough said. You get my point. So Bret Stephens I read. Tom Friedman I read, even though I don't always agree with him, but I think he's a reasoned person. So I read Tom Friedman, I read Bret Stephens. Sometimes I'll read things in the Wall Street Journal when it comes to Israel, because that's an opinion I like, and I read Times of Israel. So that's enough. That's enough for me to keep me busy and to have me thinking. Okay, so reading the news that Yahya Sinwar, I wonder what Yahya means in Arabic, because there's a lot of Arabic words and Hebrew words that are very similar. So if Yahya is like the Hebrew word Chaim, it means he will live, which is then pretty ironic what kind of name he has. So, but I don't know. So I don't know if it's H as an H or if it's H meant to be a ch, like in challah. Okay, so if it's Yahya, and if it means life, it's interesting that he has that name. But I don't know, you can Google what does his name mean in Arabic. Yahya Sinwar, reading the news that Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's pitiless leader, had been killed on Wednesday by Israeli forces in southern Gaza, I had the same sense of elation so many people felt when Osama bin Laden was killed. right? So yes, so feeling elated about it, absolutely. To take satisfaction in the violent end of another human being, even an enemy, is almost always wrong, but there are exceptions, right? So again, he's relating what I'm feeling about this. Uh, that we shouldn't. There are certain human beings that you celebrate that they're dead, right? So imagine if I were alive during World War II and hearing about Hitler's suicide, I would have been extremely happy about that. Or other leaders, or the capture of Eichmann and by Israeli forces in Argentina and bringing him to trial, and then him being the only person in the history of the state of Israel to be executed for his crimes. That's something to be elated about. But why do you have to be elated about it? Cause us to think twice. Sinwar's death, like bin Laden's in 2011, or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's in 2019, or Hassan Nasrallah's last month, is among them, right? People you don't feel sorry for that they're dead. I'm not alone in the feeling, and I don't just mean among people who share my politics. In the Times report on Sinwar's death, a 22-year-old Gazan identified as Mohammed said the news marked the best day of my life. So here's the problem, right? There are some Palestinians in Gaza who are willing to say something against Hamas, but either, they take the name Muhammad, right? So in other words, it's like it's like John Doe. Okay, that's like somebody taking the name John Doe in America. Muhammad is the most common Arabic name. So it doesn't mean that his name is Muhammad, but it means that he can't be identified truly as saying something like this, that this is the best day of my life. Because if Hamas knew who this Muhammad was, it might be the last day of his life too. Okay, so just as long as we understand that. So that's the problem in the Palestinian society today. How much are the average Palestinian willing to share their real opinion? And what is their real opinion? We're not going to get to the Wall Street Journal article, but if you look at the Wall Street Journal article that was in the digital edition this morning, written by two people with very Arabic sounding names. Here, I'll show you what it is. This is the article. In death, Hamas leader may have won wider support than when he was alive. I commend that article to you, and it seems to quote some statistics of surveys that have been done of Palestinian society. So I really don't know how accurate those surveys are, really, because how free do people think they can be when they give their opinion, no matter the security or privacy of the person asking it and the results too. So this Muhammad goes on, he humiliated us, started the war, scattered us, and made us displaced without food, water, food, or money, Muhammad said. He's the one who made Israel do this. Okay, so it's amazing that the New York Times is able to find somebody to say this. And this is what actually Israel wants the world to know. But it doesn't get the headlines like a picture of civilians running for their lives or blown up buildings do. Many other Gazans, perhaps a majority, undoubtedly feel the same way. It's Hamas's reign of terror over them, which Sinwar enforced through a regime of Stasi-like domestic surveillance and extreme brutality toward anyone who questioned Hamas's edicts or ran afoul its moral code, including for the crime of being gay, that inhibits them from saying so out loud. Right? So lots of things about that. I'm sorry I didn't see the... Okay, so thanks, Lori, for posting in the chat. It means that God is gracious or merciful, or it's Arabic for John, according to what I just read, meaning to live or alive. Right, okay. So... okay, fascinating that that's what his name means. Okay. Wait a second. What is the challenge now? Some analysts think the main issue is whether Sinwar's demise can facilitate a deal that frees the hostages, ends the fighting, and allows reconstruction in Gaza to begin. I mean, that's my initial reaction last week to Sinwar's killing. Maybe now this could lead to the end to the war. Unlikely, many Israelis, most of all the prime minister, feel they're finally winning the war. They will want to press the military initiative in Gaza and Lebanon, despite the terrible risk to the remaining hostages. Whoever next takes charge of Hamas will not want to make a conciliatory move toward Israel as his first leadership act. It could easily be his last. And the next major scene of war will probably be Israel's much-awaited retaliatory strike on Iran. We'll see how that plays out. So Bret Stephens recognizing that, this isn't the end of the war, that people might be tempted to think that it is, and that the next leader could be even more cruel and strident in his position than Sinwar was. But, Stephens goes on, the opportunity in Sinwar's death and Hamas's military evisceration is that it begins to open a space for young Gazans like Mohammed to openly and assertively reject Hamas's brand of maximalist, fanatical Islamist politics. Sinwar once told an Israeli intelligence officer when he was in Israeli prison that he would willingly lose 100,000 Palestinian civilians for the sake of freeing 100 Palestinian security prisoners. Right? So we understand Sinwar's mentality, and that terrorists and terrorist operatives were more important to Sinwar than the average Palestinian civilian. He clearly meant it and fought his side of the war accordingly. But after the last year of agony, ordinary Gazans seem less likely to be willing, if they ever were, to serve as Hamas's human sacrifices in its quest to annihilate Israel. Okay, so they might not be willing, but they might not have a choice. Because certainly Israel's not letting those refugees in, those displaced people into Israel. Certainly not going to do that. Where else can they go? So they might have the opinion to be against Sinwar and against terrorism, but they have no choice because Hamas is the one who's running the infrastructure. So who's going to take over the infrastructure? And Hamas is the one who caused the hospitals to be blown up because their military operations were taking place in the hospitals and the schools and the mosques. So what they could say that they disagree with Hamas, but in reality, what are they going to do about it? How can those Gazans wrest political control from Hamas? There's an argument that ending the war immediately and establishing a technocratic government in Gaza that doesn't formally include Hamas could marginalize the group politically. There's also a wishful thought, at least among right-wing Israelis, that Israel can indefinitely reoccupy the territory until it is de-radicalized. So the options on the table, this is Tom Friedman actually speaking about this, to convince the Israeli government to work with Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar to set up a multinational Arab force to go in there, to maintain control, take over the infrastructure, and rebuild, and to start doing that now. It seems like Netanyahu is not willing to do that. At least he hasn't said so publicly. But that's the Tom Friedman approach. And that also is the approach of President Biden and other European countries, that's what they would like to see. The other approach is the far right. And there are people in Israel who are advocating for settling Gaza and making it a Jewish place and part of Israel. That would ensure once and for all the end to Hamas being in Gaza. So I don't think that is a realistic thing. I don't think the Egypt, Qatar, United Arab Emirates thing is realistic yet, but maybe, who am I to say, maybe it has more potential, certainly, than the other, making it a Jewish place. So the problem with the first idea is that it misunderstands how Hamas maintains its rule, not through popularity, but through terror. If Hamas, however diminished, can maintain its arms, it will enforce its writ. The problem with the second is that it fails to understand how de-radicalization in a place like Gaza could work, which is not by giving Gazans a moral incentive to wage a long-running guerrilla war, right? If Israel goes in there, it'll be a reason for Hamas to stay active, to get Israel out. If Israel tries to again put down roots in Gaza beyond maintaining control of its perimeter, it will fuel the very fire it's trying to put out. The trick lies in finding a way between two competing imperatives: the need to continue to destroy Hamas as a force that can rule Gaza, but to do so in a way that doesn't justify among many Palestinians its status as a legitimate resistance movement. This could be done in various ways. Indefinite Israeli control of Gaza's border with Egypt will help stop Hamas from rearming and giving Israelis greater assurance that the territory will not again become a mortal threat. Right? A lot of the tunnels into Gaza came from Egypt, and a lot of the arms that they received and supplies that Hamas received came through Egypt. And Egypt has been fighting back against Israeli control over what's called that Philadelphia corridor, that border, that whole western border of Gaza that is with Egypt. So ideally, Israel should have control over that to ensure that those tunnels aren't rebuilt and that supplies get into Gaza. An offer of safe passage out of Gaza for Hamas fighters and their families can thin the group's ranks, creating well-equipped humanitarian safe zones, perhaps administered by NATO security forces for Gazan women, children, the elderly, and men who have passed the security screening, can further safeguard civilians and separate them from potential combatants. Finally, an Arab mandate for Palestine, which I first proposed back in March, could provide a long-term answer for all sides: a credible Arab-led security force in Gaza, European-led economic reconstruction, a long-term path toward a politically moderate, economically prosperous Palestinian state, closer ties between Israel and friendly Arab states. It's always a mistake to speak of solutions in the Middle East, but plausible grounds for optimism can do a lot to dissolve the allure of fanaticism.
Jonah,
Yes, Bess?
what is the, oh shoot, how could they leave the exit of
Oh, right,
Hamas?
the safe passage? Right, I don't know.
To
I don't,
where?
right, I don't know. Maybe it's to the West Bank, or maybe it's to some other Arab country. I don't know. I haven't heard the details of how that would work.
Okay.
But I also heard that the former chairman of SodaStream, a guy named Danny Birnbaum, who, by the way, whose father, may he rest in peace, was a survivor of the Holocaust and a conservative rabbi, classmate of my father from the seminary. Just a small world about the SodaStream guy. Anyway, Danny Birnbaum offered $100,000. I don't know if it's per person, for these people who are housing the hostages, to let them free. And the offer stands until Wednesday. So, there are people trying to do things to get the hostages out. So I don't know how that money would work and who it goes to or anything like that. Finally, an Arab mandate for Palestine, which we did that. It may take the destruction of the next few years of Hamas's leadership to break the group's political military grip. But for young Gazans like Mohammed, to say nothing of so many Israelis, the belated end of Sinwar's bloody tyranny marks the dawn of hope. Right? So, yeah, we can be idealistic and fantasize that it's the dawn of hope, just like we thought that the Oslo Accords in 1993 was a dawn of hope. Can you imagine all the songs of peace that were sung? And in fact, Yitzhak Rabin, may rest in peace, was singing a peace song moments before he was assassinated by a fellow Israeli Jew. Right, the positive peace songs that were being written in Israel and being sung from 1993 for the next couple of years, like it was contagious, thinking that peace is at hand, and then Arafat and his fellow PLO terrorists put an end to that idea. So, Israel, rightly so, is pretty resigned about its fate, and doesn't really the person who's been thinking a lot would not be celebrating in the street because, there's nothing really to celebrate yet. And how we celebrate and what we're going to be celebrating, what the future looks like, who knows? Who knows? But, the future will be brighter once the hostages come home, whether alive or dead. Once the hostages come home, then maybe the future will be brighter. But even then, who knows? Who knows what will be? So, any other questions or comments? Because, yes, Bob.
Two things. I may not have gone out into the street to celebrate, but I'm sure happy.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's what I said. I'm happy. I'm happy. Yes, absolutely. That Israel was able to just the fact that Israel was able to do it is a military feat, and
and
that's yes. So
if it
absolutely.
was, I may have, if I was in a bunch of people, I may have, but I didn't have that chance. But, for us here in the United States to say this should be the thing for Gaza, it really should be the other Arab countries saying this is what we should do. And I don't hear them speaking out.
Right,
I don't hear Jordan. I don't hear Egypt. I
right.
don't hear Saudi Arabia. Let them, they should step forward.
Right. I agree with you. And again, we're venturing into territory that I know nothing about, but I will say that part of this plan, that if you just look for Tom Friedman's article from the same day in the New York Times, he talks more about this economic revival plan or reconstruction plan and how it could theoretically work. It's the same kind of plan to help boost up the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which hasn't really worked for the Palestinian Authority either because of how corrupt the Palestinian Authority is. So the plan is a nice plan on paper, but who knows if even these Arab countries have signed off on it privately about this. But that's the idea that uh, on paper, that's what it looks like should be done. But in reality, it's never happened before, so why would we think it's going to happen in the future? So I don't know, but we won't know anything until the war ends. I don't think anything can happen until the war there's a ceasefire and some hint from Netanyahu about what the next step is, and we haven't seen any of that.
And speaking of celebrating, I'm sorry, Bess, just a minute.
Okay.
Let's not forget on 9/11, who was celebrating? The
No, that's right.
Palestinians.
Right, right, right. You're right. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, we have to remember that. But also, when in diplomacy, no matter how hard it is, you have to put aside the past in order to work in the present and the future. And so, one of the really, really difficult challenges for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that you got the religious narrative that is thousands of years old that weighs on these negotiations. So how can Israel negotiate with Palestinians when it's land that's promised to Abraham and Sarah in the Torah? So it makes it even that much harder to put that aside. And you know how hard it was for France and Germany to reach a treaty over Alsace-Lorraine region. Is that France? Is that Germany? That only goes back a couple hundred years, right? Or a few hundred years. The land of Israel goes back thousands of years. So it exponentially makes it that much harder to negotiate a realistic end to conflict. Is Bess no longer there? Yeah, I see that. Uh, so, well, we're going to end for today and hope everybody has a good rest of the day. We will meet again next Monday. So let me just say this. 2 Mondays from now, we will not meet. It's my son is getting married, poo poo poo, on Sunday, November 3rd. So Monday, November 4th, coming back from the wedding, won't have in the mindset to prepare anything for a class. So we're not going to have class on November 4th, but November 11th will be our next class, and that will be the first time that we'll switch the time to the evening. So we'll be will be after evening minyan at 7:45, starting November. So next week will be at 11 a.m. as usual, then off until November 11th when we start being at 7:45. Okay. Have a good day,
Right.
everybody, and
Good day.
and
Yom
Chag
Tov,
Sameach for
Torah.
the rest of the holiday. Chag Sameach. Thanks.
Thank you.